Welcome to the House of Truth. Today we're continuing our series on the days of the kingdom. Now, last time we met, we weren't in this series. We had jumped in our intermittent series on the days on the son of David, but how Messiah was the son of David, and now it's David's life and his writings and the people around him all foreshadowed everything Messiah would do. And then last time we talked about particularly the spirit of Messiah, how David's life had done that, and foreshadowing how the Spirit of God worked in the life of Messiah and in the lives of the believers. Everything, including supernatural things like speaking in tongues. But the most important supernatural thing was in the process of being born again. All foretold by David in his Psalms, or described as it happened in his own life. And the son of David had the Spirit of God caused the children of the followers of the son of David to do the same thing. But before that, in this series we're on now, the days of the kingdom, we were talking about the temple has started. And we started off with the conditions of Israel after Solomon had taken care of all those outstanding issues, how they were just right for him to go ahead and focus on this. And how he began by making deals to get the material and the skill. And now nothing was, and it was all put together to be put. It was all cut and everything off in a distance, off other places. So there was no sound heard in the temple. So but it all be put together, kind of like a Lego set or whatever, if you will, on the temple mount itself. And how he began by putting the stone structure up first of the temple, then covered the interior of both the holy place and the holies with wood, various types of wood. And then we looked at the holy place. I mean, the Holy of Holies. He started working from there, then backwards to the whole, from there outward. Okay. And it began with two cherubim or angels, we would call them angels today, that were 10 cubits high with wingspans of 10 cubits each, whose wings touched the walls and each other, and they looked together. They looked towards each other. I mean, they looked at where the presence of God would be over the Ark of the Covenant. And there's a lot we covered in that. I'm not going to necessarily cover all that, but and we saw the finishing of the Holy of Holy place, all the decoration of it on the inside, many details that were different than there was in the tabernacle. And then we ended with a gold chain lattice curtain, and in front of it, on the inside, and in front of it, on the outside, was one just like what was in the tabernacle, made in a similar manner as the one in the tabernacle, separate the holy place from the Holy of Holies. But the holy place was unfinished when we left off. We hadn't gotten there. And indeed, they can't really go for business and doing everything it's supposed to do until all of it's finished. And there's 35 acres, and this house, as we mentioned here, was about an eighth of an acre. So today we're going to look at what's going to fill up all the other space, and what's it take to get it finished to be ready for business, and how long does that take? So we're going to begin in 1 Kings 6:9 through 29 through 33, with him finishing up the holy place. And he carved the walls of the house round about with carved figures of cherubims and palm trees and open flowers, within and without. And the floors of the house he overlaid with gold, within and without. And for the entering of the oracle he made the doors of olive trees. The lintel and the side post were a fifth part of the wall. And the two doors were of olive tree, and he carved upon them cherubims, carvings of cherubims and palm trees, and open flowers, and overlaid them with gold, and spread with gold upon the cherubims and upon the palm trees. He also made for the door of the temple post of olive trees a fourth part of the wall. Okay, on the Holy of Holies, it didn't tell us how big the opening was for the door. Now, assuming it's the same size as this one, we can see it's a fourth part of the wall. It's and goes up to the top almost. A fifth part of the wall goes up 5/8 of the. So this is 20. This is 20 cubits. This is 20 cubits tall. And remember, we talked about how there's a 10 cubit space between the outside of the building and the inside of these rooms. And so the inside of this room is 20, and a fifth part of that would be 4 cubits. So that door space is 16 cubits by 5. Now, I mentioned last time about the gold, and it told us there was 600. There was 600 talents of gold used in there, but I had not looked up the density of gold. Didn't know off the top of my head, and I wasn't sure how thick it was. Well, I've done that since then. When we consider the door here, you end up with the gold that's about 1/2 inch thick in the Holy of Holies. So we can imagine it's probably the same thickness here and everywhere else it's mentioned. Okay, so and so he's covering all the floors, and before he covered them, he carved them on the wood. These cherubims and palm trees and open flowers, within and without. Now, open flowers, of course, speak of fragrance and so on and so forth. And, the palm trees, angelic, of course. I mean, the cherubim are angelic, of course. Speaks of heaven, but why palm trees? Because palm trees are a sign of, when you're in the desert and you see palm trees, there's an oasis. What's that place? A place of relaxation and refreshment. So it's fitting that they also were there in this house. It's symbolizing the New Jerusalem, the new heaven, new earth. We'll talk about that more. But certainly the heavenly realm. The gold without and the gold within represents that, speaks to that as well. Now, okay, so now, but what about these? Now, this is a thought here. All this time so far, he's had no door. There's no door to the front house because he's building this thing from the back wall, the Holy of Holies, forward to the front wall. He'd already built the porch, but although there's a little bit more to add to it, we'll see a little later. But he's already built the porch that was in front of it. Now, the two door, we continue on in 1 Kings 6, verse 34 through 38. The two doors were a fir tree. The two leaves of one door were folding, and the two leaves of the other door were folding. And he carved thereon cherubims and palm trees and open flowers, and covered them with gold fitted upon the carved work. He built the inner court with 3 rows of hewed stone and a row of cedar beams. In the 4th year, was laid the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid in the month Ziph. In the 11th year, in the month Bul, which is the 8th month, was the house finished throughout all the parts thereof, according to the fashion of it. So he was 7 years in building it. Okay, after 7 years, he's finally finished building this thing. And really it's 7.5 years. Ziph, if you remember last time, was the 2nd month. Bul is the 8th month. Okay, we're now in the 11th year of his reign. That means 10 years have gone by. So Solomon here now, we're at 3111 since Adam was formed out of the dust of the ground. And a significance here about Ziph and Bul is this: these are names. These are Philistine names for the month. The only month that had a name before up to this point was Aviv, the first month, which meant spring, because it always had the occur in the spring. Okay, so when you set everything else off of. Well, he's using Philistine months here. Now, the Philistines were not mathematically sophisticated like the Babylonians and couldn't calculate when the moon was renewed, when the month began, and they didn't have the Urim and Thummim and couldn't do it by revelation like the high priest did of Israel to the Urim and Thummim, where the Spirit of God revealed perhaps the day before, were not to blow the Ketzesoret, the silver trumpets, indicating the new moon. Did it by revelation. Well, these guys did it by observation. And of course, there's lots of problems with that, and the weather and stuff can mess you up. And and ultimately end up sort of going the calculation anyway, because they know it can't be more than 30 days. They just be 29 or 30 days between lunations. But this is foreshadowing something here. It's telling us something here, that this is not done in accordance with the Spirit of God. He's using these names from idolatry. And again, not rely. It does not rely on the Spirit of God. It relies on the seeing of the eyes, observation. And of course, the 7 years also speak completion. Speak of heaven as well. That 7-year cycle, that year of rest, so on and so forth. In Acts 7:45 to 47, we get a little summary of everything we've been reading about concerning the temple. Really, all the way back from looking forward to it from the time of Moses, from the time they entered the promised land, till Solomon actually did it. Which also our fathers came after, brought in with Joshua into the possession of the Gentiles, whom God drove out before the face of our fathers into the days of David, who found favor before God, desired to find a tabernacle for God of Jacob. But Solomon built him a house. Now, I said Joshua, but I know it says Jesus here. It's Iesus in Greek, but you look in the Septuagint, Iesus is also the Greek equivalent of Yahshua. Yahshua is the name of Messiah. It's also the name of Joshua. Well, it wasn't Yahshua, Messiah, who brought him into the possession of the Gentiles, talking about the Canaanites. It was Joshua, as we'd say in English, Joshua, the servant of Moses, the one who judged Israel after Moses died was Joshua. And he brought him into the promised land. And there had been this, and God had said that when they got in the promised land, got things settled, he was going to show the place he chose his name, and he was going to build a permanent house for him there, as opposed to the tabernacle, which was temporary in a mobile home. I mean, literally, it was mobile. It was mobile. He took it apart and rebuilt it all the time. And David had wanted to do this, and he found favor with God and wanted to do this, but he wasn't allowed to. One thing, he was too busy finishing up those things. But he was a man of war and blood, and God wanted a man of peace to build it, because he's painting a picture here of a future work of Messiah. So Solomon, which means peaceable, built him this house, the temple. Okay, so the temple itself is built, the building. It's got a big old it's got a porch in front of it of 120 cubits. And remember, that's like around 200 feet. For metric, it's over 60 cubits. I mean, 60 meters. It's a big porch in front of it, sticking out way high, very narrow, only coming out 10 cubits, 20 cubits wide. and very high. Got the house itself 30 cubits high, 60 long, 60 deep if you're looking from the front, 20 wide. Inside there, the holy place, the Holy of Holies, everything's 20. It's a cube, 20 by 20 by 20. The holy place is 40 by 20 by 20. Okay. It's all done. However, as mentioned, that building's just done, but there's a lot more that has to be done before they can do this. There's no place for the priests to make sacrifices, and so on and so forth. All the things that are needed to carry out all those rituals God laid out in the law He gave Moses. So we're gonna pick up and see what Solomon does about this next at the end of the 7 years. And why he does next is really telling in its own way. But Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house. He also built a house of the forest of Lebanon. Length thereof was of 100 cubits, and the breadth thereof 30 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits. 4 rows of cedar pillars, with cedar beams upon the pillars. It was covered with cedar upon the beams that lay on 45 pillars, 15 of the row. And there were windows in the 3 rows, and light was against light in 3 ranks. Okay, so Solomon, remember, made a deal with Hiram, the king of Tyre, who was friends of David, and we saw even the worshiper of God, for the temple. But why was that? He went and bought stuff to build his own house, or really houses, as it were. And those 13 years. Well, 13 years in 13 in the scriptures, those numbers always associate with rebellion, strife, and trouble. Okay. Another foreshadowing of things to come in the life of Solomon. Now, notice his house is 100 cubits. It's deeper. This other house he's building is deeper than, and notice it's the house of the forest of Lebanon. Talking about it's made out of cedar. Doesn't specify where it's at. Maybe it's a place outside Jerusalem, a summer home or something, in a cooler location. It wasn't uncommon, a resort. It's not necessarily his, or perhaps it is referring to his palace. He's been living there, but this is a house here. This is, so it's 100 by 50. It's much bigger. It's saying it much more floor space than the tabernacle. I mean than the temple did. The temple, remember, was 20 by 60. Took up 1,200 square cubits. This one's taking up 5,000 square cubits. It's more than 4 times as big as the temple he just built. Now, he's covering it with cedars everywhere. There's 45 pillars, okay? 15 in the row. So 3 rows of pillars, 3 rows of windows, and the light shining through them is going to make imagine like square windows, and there's a space between them on the inside. That light is going to form the shape of those windows in somewhere. So you're going to see 3 ranks. And the height's 30 cubits. So perhaps there's a window. There's probably a window per story, each story being 30 cubits, 10 cubits tall, which is 17 1/3 feet. So, think of a vaulted ceilings everywhere, that kind of thing. Okay. Now, it's 13 years. So he begins building his house right when the temple's finished. And that's brought up for us definitely in scripture, okay? That it's 20 years altogether. Now his palace here is finished at the end of that 13 years. I mean, it's 21, 24. the 23rd year of his reign, or 24th year of his reign, I should say. 23 years have gone by since he became king. Okay. 23 years have gone by since he became king, since he married the daughter of Pharaoh. It was his only wife so far at this point, as far as we know. Now let's continue on reading about this house. And all the doors of the posts were square, and posts were square with the windows. Light was against light in three ranks. We'd probably say 3 stories today. He made a porch of pillars. The length thereof was 50 cubits, and the breadth thereof 30 cubits. And the porch was before them, and the other pillars in the thick beam were before them. He made a porch of the throne where he might judge, even the porch of judgment, and it was covered with cedar from one side of the floor to the other. And this house where he built had another court within the porch that was of like work. Solomon made a house for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken to wife, like unto this porch. Okay, he's got this covered porch, and perhaps non-common. They get uncovered if they want to, they want to make it a little cooler or provide shade, whichever. Perhaps some sort of canopy go across the top. And so he's got this throne of judgment, but then he makes himself one like it, just for his own personal use. And then he makes a house for Pharaoh's daughter, like the porch, meaning completely covered with cedar from one side of the floor to the other. You notice on his porch, it's just the floors that are covered. And we got these beams. So he's got this courtyard with this porch where he sits to do judgment. He has another one that's a public one for his public role as king. He's building a private one as well, just for entertaining guests or whatever. And then he made one. Then he made a house for Pharaoh's daughter that also had cedar completely covering the floor, and perhaps the walls and stuff like his own house. Okay, so far, still only one wife, as far as the inscription indicate otherwise at this point. And he's provided her own house, which again foreshadows something. She's been living in a house with him up to this point, but now she's going to be in her own house after 23 years of marriage. Now we continue on in 1 Kings 7, verses 9 through 12. And these were costly stones according to the measures of hewed stones, solid with saws within and without, even from the foundation to the coping, and on the outside towards the great house. And the foundation was of costly stones, even great stones, stones of 10 cubits, and stones of 8 cubits. And above were costly stones, after the measure of hewed stones, and cedars. And the great court round about with three rows of hewed stones, and a row of cedar beams, both from the inner court and the house of the Lord and the porch of the house. Okay, so he's got these hewn stones squared off, costly stones, perhaps Jerusalem stone like it's used today, gold-colored limestone that's common there. But perhaps this is costly. It may have been something like white marble imported from Greece. Aspereal, as the Greeks say. They highly esteem it. Aspereal, by the way, means white, doesn't mean marble, just to be clear, okay? They greatly esteem it. Well, notice how big these stones are. This is not their length. 10 cubits, plus however tall they are, set. Perhaps squared, okay? Or 10 cubits. and however long they are. I mean, wide and tall they are. And 8 cubits. Okay, 10 cubits again is about 17, about 17 and a quarter feet, 17 feet 3 inches. So, eight cubits would be a little under 14 feet, about 13 and a half or something of that, 13 and 3/4, something of that nature. So, put that, and if your metric is 5.5 meters, it's 10 cubits. So 8 cubits would be about 5.5 meters for 10 cubits, 4.4 meters for 8 cubits. So these were above and above were costly stones after the measure of the huge stones of the cedar. So, right, so he's putting a foundation of costly stones, these great stones. He's putting more stones on them for decoration. They're even more costly. Again, similar in a lot of ways to what he did with the outside part of the tabernacle, of the beginning part of the temple. But he's making himself a house similar in many regards, but much bigger. Now, a great court was round about with hewn stones for both the inner house of the house of the Lord and for the porch of the house. Okay, so these costly stones. Notice a great court was round about. We've now switched over from Solomon's house. So this part we're now switched over here. I made a mistake. This isn't talking about his house. This is all talking about the court, the outer court and the inner court. The inner court's where the priests are. And notice for the porch of the house, he's going to make Solomon's colonnade, Solomon's porch. That later Herod, try to copy in his reference where Messiah walked. Okay, these are all the porch. This is all the port, and this is the outer. This is the wall going all around the outer part of the 35 acres. He's making all this expensive stones. Remember, Herod tried to mimic this as best he could. And remember what the disciples said. Wow, look at those great and costly stones, huh? Now, so he's got 2 walls here. And I want to draw your attention to this. Only 2 walls. He's got the inner court for the house of the Lord and for the porch of the Lord of the house, okay? So that inner court where the priests do, and there's this other wall, it's the outer court, the great court. Now, what's missing here that was at in the time of the Herod the Great, the temple when Messiah was there? There is no soreg, no wall of separation. That wall of separation that Paul wrote down, they got torn down, was never in the tabernacle that separated Jews from Gentiles. It was never in the temple that Solomon built. And those instructions remember, David got them by the Spirit from God. There was never a wall of division. Remember the tabernacle of David, Jew and Gentile. The ark was behind a curtain, and Jew and Gentile worshiped in it together. No separation between them. How David, at one point, even had a Gentile who came to help him be over 1/3 of his army. And some of the people that weren't even Gentiles, He had Gentiles among his mighty men. There was no wall of separation in the temple that Solomon built. That wall of separation was put by men to separate the Jews from the Gentiles later. It simply did not occur here. It did not occur here in the instructions that David was given by the Spirit of God that he passed on to Solomon. Now we're going to go to 1 Kings 7, verse 13 through 17, and we're going to continue on. And King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. He was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali. And his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass, and is filled with wisdom and understanding and cunning to work all works in brass. And he came to King Solomon and wrought all his work. For he cast 2 pillars of brass of 18 cubits high apiece. A line of 12 cubits did compass them round about. And he made 2 capitals of molten brass to set upon the tops of the pillars. The height of one capital was 5 cubits, and the height of the other capital was 5 cubits. And a net of checker work and the wreaths of chain work for the capitals was on the top of the pillars, 7 for one capital and 7 for the other capital. Okay, so he's got. So now, first of all, let's look at this man. This is not the same guy who was brought out earlier in the house was built. 7 years plus earlier. And we notice that this is happening parallel to the same time Solomon's building his own house. While his house is being built, or houses, like I said, he built one for his Pharaoh's daughters too, as well. At the same time, he's still taking care of the temple being built. So the entire complex, so it can be open, for business, and the Ark of the Covenant could be in one place with the priests again, and so on and so forth. And can resume in even a greater way the things that Moses had been commanded under the law that God gave Moses concerning the rituals. Well, this man is not from the tribe. His mother's not from the tribe of Dan, and his mother is not. This man's mother's a widow, and the other man's mother was not a widow. And we're going to see this man's name is also Hiram. Well, we see right there, he's also Hiram. So this is not the same guy. They're like, well, look, man, they contradict each other. No, there's no contradiction. There's just 2 different people. This guy with a different skill set. And his main thing is brass. Now, we talked before how the Hebrew word for brass can also mean bronze and copper. Brass is an alloy of copper and iron, okay, or steel. Makes it much stronger, and perhaps that's what it is. But it could be copper as well. But the important thing is, regardless of where it's in bronze, conversely, is a lot weaker. It's an alloy of copper and tin. Okay. But the indication from here, it's either going to be brass or copper. We'll see that later. Okay. Again, the Hebrew word could mean, one Hebrew word for 3 things. 3 things. Perhaps when they originated, those alloys didn't exist. But because they're primarily copper, it's still used for all 3 of them. All right. So he's making these pillars of brass, 18 cubits high apiece. Well, it's 18 cubits high. Would be a little bit under 40 feet. 40 feet if you're using American measurements, or we could say almost 11 meters, 10.9 meters if you're metric. Now, so he's saying the circumference was 12 cubits. And that made him a little smaller than 4 cubits in diameter. So these capitals are about a cubit larger, so that all the way around the height, and the height's 5 cubits tall. So he's making these 2 cubits, their height is 5 cubits tall. And if they're the same width, they put them a cubit out from the top. Okay, so these are just something to put on top of these pillars, is what they are. And on top of them, he's got nets of checker work, and wreaths of chain work. All right, he's got some. He's got this checkered stains. And he's got these wreaths on the top, and these wreaths coming down, 7 on each side. Okay, so this is one pillar here, and let's continue on reading about this pillar. He made the 2 pillars and 2 rows round about upon one pillar to cover the capitals upon the top with pomegranates. So he did with the other capiter. And the pomegranates on the top of the pillars were of lily work on the porch, 4 cubits. And the chambers upon the 2 pillars, and upon the capitals were upon the 2 pillars were pomegranates above, over against the belly, which was by the network, and the pomegranates were 200 in rows round about upon each capiter. And he set the pillars in a porch on the temple. And he set a right pillar, and he called the name there of Yakim. And he set up the left pillar and called the name of it Boaz. And the top of the pillars was the lily work. So the work of the pillars was finished. Okay, he's made these couple of pillars, and notice he calls them Yakim and Boaz. Yakin is let me think of her. God brings, roughly, and strength. Okay, Boaz means strength. So God, so there's this assurance of strength. That he's the assurance of strength here. Is the name of these is what these 2 pillars mean. And now notice the capiter's 4 cubits. Okay, so it's about the same diameter, but it's sticking up there an extra 5 cubits high. And notice remember there was 2 networks on each. There's 200. So there's 400. There's 100 on each chain. $400 rows in rows round about the other capiter. So there's 200 on each one of them. There's two of these wreaths with these. There's 100 on each chain. We'll keep that's important to keep straight to see it. So now these are finished. They're finished, but we're not told where they're being put. He's made them, great. Well, what's he going to do with them? Well, we look in the parallel passage of 2 Chronicles 3, verse 15 through 17, and we learn what he does with them. And he made the house 2 pillars of 30 and 5 cubits high. Made before the house 2 pillars 30 and 5 cubits high. And the capiter was on the top of each of them was 5 cubits. And he made, perhaps I did missed it. He set these in the porch of the temple. Remember, the porch is 120 cubits tall. Okay. So these are in the porch. I'm sorry, he did mention where these are. But notice this, but now let's look at this in 2 Chronicles 3, 15 through 17 and read about the sort of a parallel passage. He also, made before the house 2 pillars of 30 and 5 cubits high. And the capiter in each of them was 5 cubits. And he made the chains in the oracle, as in the oracle. He put them on the heads of the pillars and made 100 pomegranates, put them on chains. And he reared up them before the temple, one side on the right and on the left. And the name that was on the right hand, Yakim, and the name that was on the left, Boaz. All right, so first thing what you notice is 2 pillars. Well, notice the locations there. Before the house, not on the porch. Those were like at the front end of the porch. Okay. Now these are right in front, are close to the front of the temple. So you can think of them being on the other end of the porch. And they are taller. People say, well, look, it's contradiction. They're not the same height. No, because it's a different set. It is a different set of capiters altogether. Okay. It's a difference of capillars altogether. This one's taller, but also it also has these chains, and there's 100 pomegranates, but it's on each chain. And again, it's got the same as the other one. He gives them the same names. And Yakin means Yahweh, he will establish. Okay. Or God will establish Boaz strength. God will establish strength. Okay. And so it's repeated. 2 witnesses. What if you're in the courtyard approaching the temple, you got that first one that's made of brass. He will establish strength. And as you get close to the holy place, the entrance of the holy place, a second one that's larger, that also means he will establish strength. Or more accurately, Yah will establish strength. That's what the Yah and that's what the Yah in there, short for Yahweh Boave. Okay, he's going to establish strength. And notice these are the only things that are brass in this whole area. We'll talk about the significance of that later. Now, let's go to 1 Kings 7, 23 and 26 and find out what else he makes. He made a molten sea, 10 cubits from the brim of one to the other, from the one brim to the other. It was round about, and its height was 5 cubits, and a line of 30 cubits to compass it round about. And under the brim of it, round about, were knobs compassing it. 10 in a cubit, compassing the sea round about. The knobs were cast in 2 rows when it was cast. And it stood upon 12 oxen, 3 looking towards the north, 3 looking towards the west, 3 looking towards the south, and 3 looking towards the east. And the sea was set above them, and all their hinder parts were inward. It was a hand's breadth thick, and the brim thereof was wrought like the brim of a cup with flowers of lilies. And they contained 2,000 baths. Okay, he makes this molten sea. Sea referring to the water that's in it. Molten because he melted metal to make it. Okay. Now, first I want you to notice this height. It's 5 cubits. Remember, we don't have to guess what the length of a cubit was. People have found ancient writings of buildings that were to specify their foundation, whatever, in the terms of cubits, have found the buildings, and we know for certain a cubit was 20 inches, 22/3 inches in English in metric. If you're metric, I've said it before, but anyway, roughly, right, it's very close to half a meter. Okay, and 4 cubits is right at a little smidgen under 7 feet. And normal proportion person, a cubit is 1/4 of your height. Your cubit is from the tip of your middle finger to your elbow. And it indicates they measured it off the king, which wasn't uncommon. And this king, these early kings of these places tend to be tall, tall and strong. That's what they wanted initially. And so 7 foot's not, he's up there on the upper end of normal human range, okay, to be expected. Well, this height here is 5 cubits. That's that's around roughly 8.5 feet. If your metric, it's about 2 3/4 meters. Okay. And a line of cubits past the 30. So people have said, well, look, 10 cubits, 10 cubits from one brim to the other. And the line around it is 30 cubits. Well, that 10 cubits could be measured from one brim to the other, perhaps the outer. The brim themselves takes a little width. Okay, so now it's telling you on the inside. Also, it's only in precise. They're not being the precision is just down to the whole cubit. Okay, so it's a little so the it's 10 cubits from the outside of one brim to another, and this inside part's a little smaller than that. You know, a little smaller than that. Whatever's needed to make 30 cubits. And again, remember that's the precision's not that precise, and they truncate also often we've seen. So if something is say 31, well, like I say we saw with the years before, 7 years we saw with Solomon earlier, and really it was 7.5 years. They didn't round to 8, they truncated to 7. Very common. So you got to keep that in mind. Us mathematical people, the level of precision here is not high. So it's not violating anything because the precision is not the point here. These measurements are. Okay, so it's too high to be practical for a person to use. We'll look at its use in a minute. I mean, you're going to have a ladder or something. So why is it so giant? And, there's nothing like this in the tabernacle. And these 12 oxen looking there, well, notice the way they're looking, three on each side. And what should this remind us of? The New Jerusalem, where there's 3 gates, north, south, east, and west. Okay, the oxen are looking outward, and they are supporting the sea. And one thing about the sea is this: the humanity is often described like a sea. Or to sound like a sea, it was a multitude of people, multitudes of people. So this sea is one thing. It's a picture of multitudes of people that are being held up by the 12 tribes of Israel. The whole point of Israel was Messiah. But Israel's not, it's not like God's done with Israel now and moved on. He's going to rule over Israel. He promised each of his disciples to rule over a tribe. But Israel, remember, salvation is of the Jews, as Shaul the Apostle Paul said. They are upholding that sea that's above them. That sea of salvation. Now, in 1 Chronicles 4:1, we get something mentioned that's never mentioned in First King. It's never mentioned in the passage of the king, but it's super important. He made an altar of brass, 20 cubits the breadth thereof, 20 cubits the length thereof, 20 cubits the breadth thereof, and 10 cubits the height thereof. Okay, this is gigantic compared to the brazen altar that was in the tabernacle. And if you remember, the brazen altar of the tabernacle was about the height of a man, and you had to have multiple people to lift things up and put it on there. Well, this is way higher than that. It's 10 cubits high. Now, what else did we talk about that was 10 cubits high before? The cherubim in the tabernacle. Remember Og of Bashan, the last of the giants, not like Goliath, who was the son of a giant, the son of the giants, the last of the giants, the son of angels and men, angels that are married with human women. His bedstead was 9 cubits, making him about 8 cubits. Those angels in the Holy of Holies are scale size to an actual angel. Angels can change their appearance, so on and so forth, we've seen in Scripture. But this is their default size, 10 cubits high. Everything in the reason why the brazen sea and this altar of brass are so huge too huge to be practical for human beings. We're going to have to get ladders and ramps and stuff to use them. It's because they're scaled for the angels. Because this whole thing speaks of something greater than the Tabernacle of Moses spoke of. It's, you know, and we'll talk and we'll unpack that more as we go along. Now we're going to finish in 2 Chronicles 2, 4, and 4. I'm sorry, verses 2 through 5, with a little more information about the brazen sea, the molten sea. And I also made a molten sea of 10 cubits from brim to brim, round in compass, 5 cubits the height thereof, and the line of 30 cubits to compass it round about. It was a similitude of oxen, which did compass it round about, 10 in a cubit, compassing the sea round about. 2 rows of oxen were cast when it was cast. It stood upon 12 oxen, 3 looking towards the north, 3 looking towards the west, 3 looking towards the south, 3 looking towards the east. The sea was set above them. All their hinder parts were inward. And the thickness of it was a handbreadth, and the brim of it was like the brim of a cup, with the flowers of lilies, and it received and held 3,000 baths. Okay, notice the thickness against the handbreadth. A handbreadth is a quarter of a cubit. So it's about 5 inch so it's about 5 inches long. You know, if your metric, about 20 centimeters. Yeah, about 20 centimeters. Okay. And about 25 centimeters, I should say. And it received and held 3,000 baths. Okay, notice it's more baths than the other place. Some people say, well, look, there's a contradiction. No, there's not. This is how much water it could hold maximum. This is how much water that normally held. And why the difference? Well, okay, this thing is 5 cubits high. If you're 10 cubits tall, it's about half your height, so you can get in there. So you can step into it. Now, it's 30 cubits, plenty of room for you to be in there. But what's going to happen if you have it filled to the brim? It's going to overflow. Therefore, you're not going to fill it to the brim. You're going to fill it 2/3 full, making room for these angelic beings to get in there. Again, this is a picture of where angels live, or will live, as we shall see. In 1 Kings 7, 27 through 29, we read the following. He made 10 lavers of brass. 4 cubits was the length of one base. 10 bases of brass. And 4 cubits the breadth thereof. And 3 cubits the height of it. And the work of the bases was in this manner. They had borders. And the borders were between the ledges. Now the borders that were between the ledges were lions and oxen and cherub, and upon the ledges there was a base above. There was a base above, and beneath the lions and oxen there were certain additions made of thin work. Okay, so you got these bases, and notice they're square, but they're 3 cubits tall. 3 cubits is over 5 feet. A little over 5 feet. Well, yeah, it's 5 feet 2 inches. Okay, if your metric, it's about 1.5 meters. All right, a little tall for you to be that practical, but not necessarily, not completely. yet. So here's how these bases made. They had borders, and the borders were between the ledges. We would say the edges, okay? And upon the ledges was a base above. So these borders got these things at the bottom, got them on there, and beneath you're gonna have beneath. So the ledges are holding, and beneath them you have lions and oxen on them. Where certain additions made of thin work. So they're hanging on the outside with some sort of thin work, okay? Lions and oxens. Well, why lions and oxens? Lions, oxen, and notice there's also on the borders, there's lions, oxen, and cherubims, all right? Oh, beneath the lions and oxen were certain, so something stringing down like confetti, kind of like confetti or whatever. Now, lions and oxen and cherubims, again, all speak of heaven. Remember, these four angels that represent the Messiah, that one of the prophets saw. I believe it was Ezekiel. A lion, one had a lion face like an eagle, one like a lion, one like an ox, one like a man. Well, angels got a similar face to a man as well, normally. Okay. So they all speak of these guardians of heaven. Okay. These, three out of four of the pictures of Messiah. The angel, of course, spoke of heaven. It's of being from heaven, and they correspond to the four gospels, by the way. So, anyways, so this is what this thing is. Okay, it's a little tall. What's going to sit on this base? Well, we find out there's something under it first. We saw that line, that thing talking about something about this thing hanging down there. Well, why? Because there's something under it. And every base had four brazen wheels and plates of brass. And four corners thereof had undersetters. Under the laven were undersetters molt at the side of every addition. And the mouth of it with a capiter above was a cubit. Was a cubit. And upon the mouth thereof, round about was the work of a base, a cubit and a half. And upon the mouth of it were gravings of the borders, four square, not round. Under the borders were four wheels, and the axle trees of the wheels were joined to the base. And the axle tree of a wheel, and the height of a wheel was a cubit and a half a cubit. And the work of the wheels was like the work of a chariot wheel. Their axle trees and their naves and their felloes and their spokes were all molten. Okay, so you got these chariots here. Reminds us of what? Chariots of fire, angelic chariots we'd seen. Again, it speaks to the of angelic realm, but also those chariots of fire were there to defend Israel and could destroy people. Spoke of protection and judgment, and just as brass does. So now they're joined to the base, and these undersetters are like little legs on the corners. Notice they're on each corner. Okay. At the side of every addition, I guess where it's in the mouth of it, within the cap there, and above it was a cubit. All right, so the four corners had undersetters, and there's a cubit. Okay, so it's going to set a cubit above the wheels. The height of a wheel is a cubit and a half, so there's going to be 3/4 of a cubit going up from the axle, in the middle. Okay, up a cubit to be joined to it, and so there's going to be a little space there, so it's not rubbing against it of a 1/4 cubit. All right, so now the entire base that's now got these wheels, so you can make it mobile, is 3 3/4 cubits. All right, this makes it higher than most men. Again, not a practical size for people. But for an angel that's 10 cubits tall, no big deal. Now we continue on in 1 Kings 7:34 through 37. And we read some more about this, about these bases. In the top of there were 4 undersetters in the 4 corners of one base, and the undersetters were of the very base itself. On the top of the base were round about half a cubit high. On the top of the base, ledges thereof, and the borders thereof were the same. On the plates of the ledges thereof, and the borders thereof, he graved cherubims, lions, and palm trees, according to proportion of one, in additions round about. On this manner, he made the 10 bases, all of them one casting, one measure, and one size. Okay, they're all identical, and there's 10 of them. And the undersetters are part of the base itself. They're not attached, melted on later. They're cast in, they're part of the same casting. And the top of the base was round about half a cubit high. Okay, then now there's on top of the base, half a cubit high. Brings us brings us like 4 1/4 cubits. Top of the base, ledges thereof, and the borders there were the same. Okay. So it's got these little edges, these little ledges on the border, bordering all the way around. Okay, this is the borders we talked about. Now we got plates thereof also, and they're going down of the ledges to cover up where you see the axle wheel work, right? So they're like between the wheels sticking out a little bit, and they're covering it so you don't see that. So you don't see the undersetters. Basically, they're hiding the undersetters going down. And on them, cherubims, lions, and palm trees. Okay, and their size varies, they're proportional, depending on how big it is. So you got taller ones in taller spots and shorter ones, but they're still proportional. And then the additions round about, okay. And palm trees, again, we talked about, speaks of an oasis, a place of rest and restoration, refreshment and restoration. And now we're going to continue on in 1 Kings 7, verse 38. We got these bases with this little thing added to the top, 4 1/4 cubits tall. Well, what is going on top of these bases? Then he made 10 lavers of brass. One laver contained 40 baths, and every laver was 4 cubits. And upon the lavers, 10 bases, 1 laver. He put 5 bases on the right side of the house, 5 on the left side of the house. He set the sea on the right side of the house, eastward, over against the south. And Hiram made lavers and shovels and basins. So Hiram made an end of doing all the work that he made King Solomon for the house of the Lord. And the 2 pillars and the 2 bowls of the capitals were upon the top of the 2 pillars. And the 2 networks that cover the 2 bowls of capitals were upon the top of the pillars. 400 pomegranates for the 2 networks, even 2 rows of pomegranates in 1 network to cover the bowls of the capitals that were upon the pillars. Okay, so we got back to these pillars again at the end. Notice these lavers are 4 cubits tall, 8 1/2 cubits. Way too tall to be practical for a person. But for an angel of 10 cubits tall, about chest height. And the amount of water they contains, a person could, literally take baths in these things, okay? Again, giant size is proportional size, not in proportion to those angels that are in the Holy of Holies, not for the priest. And it talks about, yeah, first I mentioned the shovels he made. He made shovels, and of course they had those. They needed those shovels, and we'll look at those a little later. Okay, but they need those shovels, of course. I think I get mentioned again, and these shovels, of course, for getting the coals and stuff out of that giant altar and so on and so forth. And it doesn't say it; it just mentions it, perhaps in the same design as the one with Moses. There's a grate underneath, so they can get the ashes out from beneath, and so on and so forth. Okay, so those shovels are for that, or the shovels are mainly for getting rid of the ashes from burning the from the wood and in the case of whole burnt sacrifices, that came from the whole burnt sacrifice as well. So that brazen altar and all these things speak of judgment. All right, in 2 Chronicles 4:6, we finally found what these lavers are for. He also made 10 lavers and put 5 on the right and 5 on the left, and watch such as they were offered to burnt offerings, he washed them in. But the sea was for the priest to wash in. Okay, the sea, let's start with the lavers. The burnt offering, they washed them in. They'd wash them before they offered them up for sacrifice. These lavers are big enough to put in several oxen at a time per laver. They're just outside the house, made of brass. And also, when it says on the right and the left, it's talking about from perspective of not someone looking towards the house, but the house itself with its opening. How do we know this? Because the sea's on the right side of the house over against the south. If it's on the south, the sides of the north of the house have to be on the left-hand side of the opening of the house. If right, no wait, I got this backwards. It is from your looking. I'm sorry, I'm left and right impaired. I really am. If it's to the right, it's from when you're looking to the front. To the right would be the left-hand side of the house. That's how we know that. Okay, so there's these two, and this sea is for the priest to wash in. Well, the priest can take a bath in this. This sea is a picture, and notice it doesn't say their hands and their feet like the lavers in the tabernacle, which they were the wash when they came. We're going to look at that. Look at that. This they could wash their whole bodies in these. These seas are a picture of baptism. The nations, all that are saved, are baptized. We're at least baptized into the body of Messiah. The thief on the cross was baptized in the body of Messiah. The expression's actually in Scripture about someone being born again. Water baptism is a symbol of that. This sea is full of that. And it's brazen. It's brazen, indicating judgment, for those who are baptized into the kingdom escape judgment. And remember, believers, we're told, are all priests and kings as well. Believers have escaped judgment through being baptized, not as much as in the water, but as into the body of Messiah, through the work of the Holy Spirit, whereby they become priests and kings under Messiah. And they're a different order than these priests. But there's that picture here, okay, going on. And of course, well, those 10 foot, well, we'll talk about that later. But those 10 cubit angels could just pick up a person and throw them in there as well if they wanted to. Now, in 2 Chronicles 4, verse 24 through, Chronicles 4, verse 12 through 13, we continue on to read a little bit more about this in this parallel passage. To wit, the 2 pillars and the 2 pomegranates, the caplets were on the top of the 2 pillars, and the 2 wreaths to cover the pommels of the caplets, which were on the 2 pillars, and 400 pomegranates on the two wreaths, 2 rows of pomegranates on each wreath to cover the 2 pommels of the capitals which were upon the pillars. Okay, so we're going to talk about these here. We mentioned them here earlier. Now, remember, these are the only things of brass made that are close, that are in the porch area of the temple. One towards the house, one towards the outside, the taller one. And remember, their names mean Yahweh will establish strength, but brass speaks of judgment. How is Yahweh going to establish strength? By judgment on the wicked. That's why they're made of brass. And they're before you go in. You cannot have eternal peace and prosperity with rebels in the kingdom. The wicked have to be judged before you can enter in. And notice, as you enter in the porch, which we'll talk about that's a picture of something as well, before you enter into the holy place. Notice the greater judgment before you enter into the holy place. Those who are teachers and so forth are held to a stricter judgment, we're told. So, because that's the only place, only the priest could go there. But they have a taller pillars representing a stricter judgment. Now we're going to continue on here in 1 Kings 7, verse 43 through 27. We're going to see a summary of everything he built. And the 10 planes and the 10 lavers of the bases, and 1 sea and 12 oxen under the sea, and the 10 pots and the shovels, and the shovels and the basins. All these vessels which Hiram made to King Solomon for the house of the Lord were bright brass. In the plain of Jordan did the king cast them, in the ground between Succoth and Zarthan. And Solomon left all the vessels unweighed, because they were exceedingly many. Near was the weight of the brass found out. Okay, so there's a little bit in here. And so notice, first of all, I want you to know, we get this summary. 10 bases, 10 lavers on the bases. Why 10? 10 commandments. The commandments of God. And we're going to keep that in mind because that's important. The commandments of God, and 5 on each side. And remember, on the 2 tablets, there's 5 commandments on each side. 5 basins on each side. 5 bases for the sacrifices to be washed in. Wash for what? And those 10 commandments are a microcosm of all the commandments of God. The sacrifices were taking away the sin, taking away the judgment, made of brass, for breaking each one of those 10 commandments. And again, which is a picture of breaking any of the commandments. There's way more than 10 in total. So 1 sea, 1 and 12 oxen under the sea. Why? 1 place, Jew and Gentile together in 1 place. But supported by Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, through whom salvation came. But there's only 1 baptism, 1 Spirit, so 1 Messiah, so on and so forth. 1 means of escaping judgment for the righteous. And these pots, that's what they sieve. That's what they would sieve things. And remember, they would sieve things in these pots, and then pull out with the flesh hooks. Okay. So he's made all these things out of bright brass. And the term bright brass indicates it's either going to be copper or brass. Bronze is not bright if you've ever seen it. It's a kind of a matte brown, dull brown color. All right. Now notice where he makes them at Zarthan, between Succoth and Zarthan. And makes them between Succoth and Zarthan. Succoth is booths. Remember, that's where Jacob made his booths. And that tells us, it's way up there. And booths speak of what? Being there with God, in communion with God, like Feast of Tabernacles. But Zarthan means their distress. So it's a picture. So it's between being in fellowship with God and being in distress from God, where these are cast. And the clay is what they make. The clay he used to make the castings to cast the metal in. Now I want you to think about this. So Succoth, I don't remember if Succoth's on this map or not, but it's a ways up here. It's like up this area, okay, when Jacob came back in the promised land. Up in this area, he's on they're going to haul these things, and think how heavy those are. 35 pounds, 35 cubits. I'm sorry, solid base, right? I mean pillar. You got that men, but they got affinity from Egypt to know how to make these kind of halls around, right? And that's where the affinity from Egypt once again plays in, information about how to haul something that big that far, because the original pyramid stones were huge. But the Egyptians figured out some way to move them. Later, they were made of mud bricks, but first they were made of just huge cut stones from quite a distance. So you got the workforce to move them. Going to move them all the way down here. And part of that is, this is why it's taking so long to build this thing. I mean, this guy's from Tyre up here. He comes down to here, cast them again. Nothing heard in the temple. No workman heard in the temple. You got to move them all the way down here, Jerusalem, which is called Javis by one of its ancient names. Its most ancient name was Salem in the time of Jacob. The time of Abraham. When the Jebusites moved in there, they named the Javis. But now it's Jerusalem. Anyways, so it's quite a haul they got to make here. And there's exceedingly many. We'll talk about that in a minute here as well. Now we're going to look at in the parallel passage of this same summary and learn some more things he made of very importance. Furthermore, he made the court of the priests and the great court and the doors of the court, and overlaid the doors of them with brass. And he set the sea on the right side of the east end, over against the south. Okay, he made pots and shovels and basins. And Hiram finished the work he was to make for King Solomon for the house of God. Okay, so he made them with brass, overlaid them. The great court, notice there's only two courts: the court of the priests and the great court. There's no court of the Israelites in between. No court of the women inside the court of the Israelites. Those were all added by men, the Pharisees, after the design of men, not after the design of God. Men and women together, Jew and Gentile together in the great court. And the priest, only the priests and the Levites. And again, a picture of something important. We'll look at that. And we'll talk about that before we end. But notice the brass again speaks of judgment. It's a terrible thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And the sea is over there again. And now he's finished. So we got court doors to the courts. Weren't there before. Good to have. Now in 2 Chronicles 4:14 through 18, we finish up this summary. And there's really quite and we'll finish up talking about some of this brass. There's quite a bit of details here. It's important. And he also made bases and lavers he made upon the bases, and one sea and 12 oxen under it, the pots also and the shovels and the flesh hooks, and all their instruments did Hiram his father make to King Solomon for the house of bright brass. In the plain of Jordan did the king cast them, and the ground clay between Succoth and Zarthan. And Solomon made all these vessels in great abundance of the brass of weight could not be found out. Okay. Now there's a lot in here. There's a lot. All right. Well, first of all, let's talk about the pots. The pots have what in them? Boiling water. All right. Speaks of heat and liquid, right? Like the lake of fire. Think of molten lava boiling or something instead of water with fire coming up. All right. Now, he's also and flesh hooks speak of torment as well. All right, it's all made of brass. This all speaks of judgment of God, a place of eternal judgment. And the choice people have between those. The choice that people have between those. And, and Zarthan means to puncture, to pierce. Again, a choice between living with God, tabernacling with him, or being tormented. And of course that torment, that puncture, that piercing reminds of Messiah who was pierced in our place. This entire thing represents this entire courtyard. All this brass in it represent the whole thing collectively, from the giant size, angel scaled size of everything, speaks of the ultimate, in the end, the lake of fire for those who are in eternal judgment of God. Even the weight not being found out or could not be found out speaks of what? Eternal judgment. A judgment that never ends. And Israel, through whom the law came, through salvation came, those who reject the Messiah of Israel are going to be under eternal judgment. They're going to be thrown into this molten sea, the sea of judgment, the lake of fire. And Angels are the ones who actually throw them in. We're told that in scripture other places. Now we're going to finish here in First Kings 7:48 through 51. We're going to finish with there's some things that is not quite ready open for business. Now we've gone backwards from the way the house was built, the furnishing. We talk about building the walls of the courtyard, the great courtyard, and the inner courtyard, the Solomon's porch. We talked about furnishing the courtyard in all these symbols of eternal judgment. Yahweh will establish strength. Yeah, he establishes it with that lake of fire, because people have to walk by it. They have to walk by it. No one will ever rebel again. His strength is established, and no one will ever challenge it again like the way Hasatan, Satan, has. But we have not talked about the furnishings inside the Holy of Holies, the holy place, except for the altar of incense was mentioned as being made and covered in gold at the same time. It's only furniture sitting in the holy place at this point. So we're going to finish up with those, because these all speak of something better. And Solomon made all the vessels that pertain to the house of the Lord, the altar of gold and the table of gold upon where the shewbread was, and the candlesticks of pure gold, 5 on the right side, 5 on the left, before the oracle, with the flowers, with the lamps, and the tongs of gold, and the bowls and the snuffers and the basins and the spoons and the censers of pure gold, and the hinges of gold, both for the doors of the inner house, the most holy place, for the doors of the house, to wit, of the temple. So was in the work that King Solomon made for the house of the Lord. And Solomon brought in all the things which David his father dedicated, even the silver and the gold, in the vessels, and he put them among the treasures of the house, the treasures of the house of the Lord. Okay, the showbread, the bread of the presence, literally. So it literally means a stack of 12, a stack of 12 fresh baked unleavened matzahs every day. Okay, but notice the difference again between this and the Tabernacle of Moses. Not one altar of not one table of showbread, 5. The altar of gold, which the altar for burning the incense that had been mentioned before. Just letting you know it's not been forgotten here in this summary here. The candlesticks, the menorahs, but not just one, but 5 on each side. And with the flowers and the lamps and the tongs of gold. The flowers referring to those on the menorah. And the lamps being at the top. And the tongs of gold, the tongs for lighting them. And the bows and the snuffers and the basins, and the censers of pure gold and the hinges of gold. Both the doors of the inner house and the most out. Now notice there's a final set of doors. He's mentioned the doors before, but now he's finally mentions the hinges, all made of gold. And there's a summary of Solomon. Okay, some of the stuff was made earlier, as we saw when the house was made, and some's made later. Now he's completed the whole works. Okay, he's got the thing. He's completed the whole. Everything's ready to open for business. Now he's brought in all these things. The snuffers are for snuffing out the menorah, so you can change the oil one thing at a time, one bulb at a time. They just sort of so you can put new oil in or put new wicks in, as it were. The bows. The spoons are for the censer, or for the and the censers are for putting the incense. So he's got everything in there it needs. It's now open for business. And notice also outside the house, maybe even outside the courtyard, but probably inside the courtyard along the outer wall, where in that outer wall area, were built in places for them, but they're outside. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we finish it. They're outside the inner courtyard they're outside the inner courtyard where the holy place, where the temple is. Now in 2 Chronicles 4-7-8, we again see a little bit more information here in this parallel passage. You made 10 candlesticks of gold according to their form, and set them in the temple, 5 on the right hand, 5 on the left. He also made 10 tables and placed them in the temple, 5 on the right hand, 5 on the left. And he made 100 basins of gold. Okay. Yeah, our summary here about these, he's not said how tall the candlesticks are, the menorahs are. We're going to assume they're probably the same as the same as the one in the tabernacle. Otherwise, they are not necessarily giant size, but there's 10 again. 10 tables again speaks of God's commandments. Keeping God's commandments is the way into the Holy of Holies, or into the holy place you got to go through to get to the Holy of Holies. 100 basins of gold. All right, 100 is 10 squared. But now we know how many of those, and that's the reason it's telling us that. And speaks of all of God's commandments, not just the 10 commandments, by telling us this. And in our finalness here, we read in 2 Chronicles 4, verse 19, verses 5, 4:19, chapter 4:19, verse 19 through chapter 5, verse 1. The chapter break wasn't consistent with where it was in Kings. And Solomon made all the vessels that were for the house of God. The gold altar also and the gold tables there of the shewbread was set. Moreover, the candlesticks with their lamps, they should burn after the manner of the oracle of pure gold. And the flowers and the lamps and the tongs made he of gold, and that perfect gold. And the snuffers and the basins and the spoons and the censers of pure gold. And the entry of the house, the inner houses there, the most holy place, and the doors of the house of the temple were of gold. Thus all the work that Solomon made of the house of the Lord is finished. And Solomon brought all things as the day of his fire dedicated, and the silver and the gold and all the instruments, he put them among the treasures of the house of God. Okay, so we're finished here now. All this gold speaks of what? Of heaven. It speaks of the New Jerusalem. Perfect gold. Remember, there's transparent gold, and gold really is transparent if it's 100% pure. No one makes anything out of 100% pure gold because it's, first of all, hard to get it that pure, but it'd be 20 karat, 24 karat as far as they go. It's a measure of purity. You don't think of carat, the confusing measurement for the weight of a diamond. This is talking about purity when you're talking about gold, because gold past 24 karat, which is about 83% pure, becomes too soft to maintain its shape. It has to be mixed with steel or something, so because otherwise it'll be the consistency of softer than modeling clay, like silly putty, if you know what silly putty is. Or think of a soft butter, maybe not melted but soft, and it just won't keep its shape. But that perfect gold, that speaks of gold without any impurities. And it's a picture of that transparent gold that's in the throne room of God. It speaks of And all these things, this entire temple has three parts. They only had two in the tabernacle. The tabernacle had two, but this one has three. It has a porch, remember. Okay, we're all been made priests and kings. But in this one, there's the porch, there's the holy place, and there's the Holy of Holies, the throne room of God. Remember, the mercy seat represents the throne of God. And in the new heaven and new earth, in the new Jerusalem, there are those who are in the throne room of God continually. It's in Scripture, like the 24 elders, which are human beings, redeemed humans. We know because they say they've been redeemed. There are also those who are not living in the throne room of God. We're not there continually, but those who live in the New Jerusalem. But the Gentiles, the nations, same word, that are saved, we're told in Revelation 21, they come into the city, the kings of the Gentiles, and bring in their tribute. Okay, they bring in their tribute. Now, we're told in Isaiah 66, and I'll go into this a lot deeper, perhaps show a lot more scriptures on this and whatever in the fall when we talk about Succoth and the like, and how the pictures of the end times. But if there's doors on each side, in Isaiah 66 says people will see the judgment of the wicked. It'll be an abhorrent to them. It's how Isaiah 60, the last verse of Isaiah, the Messiah quotes in the Gospel of Mark, their worm never burns, their worm never dies, and the fire is never quenched. If there's there's doors on each side, and they got to avoid that lake unless that lake is surrounding the New Jerusalem like a moat of a castle. Now, the tree of life's in there for all these people with natural bodies, and they have to go in there to maintain life and for healing. They have to walk by the sea of fire. That's what those two pillars, God will establish strength. No one, it will remind them continually the judgment, that eternal judgment, that brass without weight, without end, without weight, will keep anyone from ever rebelling against God again. And it brings us to our last observation. We've looked at all these things, compared them to the tabernacle, and yet one thing's missing that's in the tabernacle that's not going to be in this temple Solomon's building. Remember, got the instructions from his father, who wrote them down, who got them by the Spirit of God. And what is that? It's silver. Silver speaks of redemption. Over and over again, when you want to redeem somebody, you have to pay silver to redeem them. The kinsman redeemer had to, buy land with silver, except, whatever. Silver speaks of redemption. The silver is outside that courtyard. That whole courtyard represents the heaven and new earth, the area of judgment on the wicked, separated from the much smaller area of where the righteous are. Narrow is the path, wide is the road that leads to destruction, and many go on it. Much bigger area inside the courtyard, whose mentions are not given here, by the way, but they're much bigger than the temple tabernacle, than there is for the house that represents the New Jerusalem, that represents the life for those. In Revelation chapter 22, the last book of the Bible, there's only those who kept the commandments of God. represented by these 10, those 10 brazen lavers, hold water, judgment lavers, breaking guilty of breaking the 10 commandments. Judgment. Those who've been washed by the blood of the Lamb have escaped judgment. Inside there, we see 10 menorahs, the light of the world, Messiah. 10 shewbread, the bread of life, Messiah. 1 altar of incense, 1 means of salvation, Messiah. But the silver, redemption, is outside of the courtyard of the priest. It's outside. There is no more redemption. That area between the outer courtyard and the inner courtyard represents the world today we live in. Today, redemption's possible. Messiah died on a cross, was dead and buried and rose again, so we could walk in life. Our part is to repent, to go and sin no more, as he said, that we can only do through the help of the Holy Spirit, as we said in our last lesson about the Spirit of the Son of David. So we can keep the commandments of God, because those that keep the commandments, in the end, there's only those who keep the commandments of God that have access to the New Jerusalem or live in it, depending on who you are. And those who do not repent, did not keep those commandments, and are in the lake of fire. There is no more redemption. When your life's over, it's over. Either you die redeemed, or you die under condemnation. All of us deserve judgment. But those who come to him in total surrender, make him Lord, that's what that means. He's the boss. He gets to tell you how to do everything. Total surrender in true repentance, because you believe God raised him from the dead, will be saved, and we'll be able to go into we'll be in the new earth, not in the lake of fire. We'll go into or live in the New Jerusalem. Depending on whether or not they keep the least commandments or not. The least commandments makes you great, keeping those, as well as the commandments of righteousness apply to everyone. Commandments of righteousness of everyone is required for you to be in the new earth. But if you're going to live in the New Jerusalem, also not just visit, you have to keep the commandments of custom, the least commandments. Least, because it doesn't matter if you keep those if you break the others. All this is pictured by that. So you have the porch where everyone can come. The priest, those who've been set apart and have extra commandments on them because they're set apart, can enter there in the throne room where only the high priest can go, where only those that God selects, and he'll select it from all nations. We're told this. That's who's in the throne room. From all nations they've been redeemed, not just Jews and Gentiles together worshiping God on his throne. So I plead with you. The time for redemption is now. There is no redemption after death. There are no more chances. No opportunities to change your mind. Your fate has been sealed. Either you're going to the outer courtyard, the place of burning, a burning in that liquid, in those giant vessels, that lake of fire, or you're ultimately going to end up in the new earth and go into the New Jerusalem at the very least from time to time. Please surrender to Messiah. Put him in charge of everything, and he'll give you the ability to obey the commandments of God. And you will be saved. In Yeshua's name, amen. That's all I have for this week. Until next week. Shalom.